We publish the Africa Annual once a year. This is going to also, we're just about to publish the Media Annual. This is our third Media Annual. It'll come out in the middle of November. And there's some top line findings about Africa specifically. And I'd like to talk about Africa because we, as Ornico, an African company now. And Africa is really, I often say it, it's a really exciting space to be. Why? Politically, democracy is taking over in Africa. We're getting some really amazing leaders within that space. But also from a societal perspective, Africa is changing dramatically. Life expectancy is going up 1 year for every 4 years, which is fascinating and amazing. HIV infections have gone down 20% in the last few years. Malaria has gone down. But the interesting thing from a societal perspective is you have some really, really serious, passionate people within Africa. And when you talk about, specifically when you're in Ghana or Nigeria, and you talk about that the GDP growth is growing by 7 or 6% in the next few years, and they look and say, Oresti, why are you so pessimistic? So, you have really, in Africa, people are looking at the glass half full, whereas in Europe, they look at the glass half empty. So economically, there's 7 out of the 10 countries in the, seven African countries out of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. And the fastest growing is actually Malawi, they're looking at 18% growth. I know it's coming from a low base, but 18% growth is phenomenal. There's high, as I said earlier, high levels of optimism. 84% of the people in Africa believe we'll be better off in the next 2 years than what we are now. In Ghana, it's 97%. Urbanization levels are high, and for marketers this is fantastic because urbanization levels are looking to be between 60 and 80% in the next 5 to 6 years. But the interesting thing about that is that the consumer industry will be a $1.6 trillion industry. And when I talk about consumer industry, that's clothing, banking, telecommunications, that industry. $1.6 trillion in the next 5 or 6 years. And that's where marketers seriously need to be, which is really, really exciting. So there's also going to be that growth of that consumer class. What is the consumer class? Is the guys that will spend 50% of their income on non-food items. And again, marketers, that's where the space that marketers need to be. So again, banking, clothing, fast food, that kind of stuff, which is really exciting for marketers. So when I looked at some of the advertising space that Ornico is in, so I looked at Nigeria and we looked at where are the biggest advertisers. So the obvious place has been telecoms and banking. But the surprising thing is one of the biggest advertisers is religion in Nigeria, which we don't even see in South Africa. So it's kind of really understanding the data and what's happening within that market space that really makes it exciting. What does the African consumer want? And it's what any other consumer wants. That's the interesting thing. It's they're very brand conscious. Quality is absolutely critical. But also we need to look at the price points. So when we advertising, let's look at quality, let's look at brands, build up our brands, but also look at absolutely a lot of the quality becomes key. Other things that brands need to look at is how do brands really get into that informal market. The informal market in Africa is, even in South Africa, in the whole of Africa, is a huge market. So how do we get into that market space? Get into the Africa Annual, get into the Media Annual, we'll explain more.